there is no way I have the right answer on everything.
Right, right, right.
So if I'm making the decision all the time, we're gonna fail. So like the collective brain trust is definitely more powerful than me individually, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not the subject matter expert on every topic, right?
Welcome to the How to Not Execute Your Strategy podcast. I'm your host, Tim Ohai. These are the lessons that make you the leader you want to be. Go to timohai.com to learn more. My guest today is Ilias Simpson. Ilias is the president of cart.com and an Air Force veteran. Believe me when I say that he is passionate about the execution of strategy. I found our conversation loaded with wisdom and best practices. See the show notes for more information about Ilias and to also get access to the leader guide for this episode. Let's get to it. Ilias, it's great to have you on the show today. How are you doing?
Doing great. Thank you for having me, Tim. Really looking forward to our conversation.
Oh, absolutely. Your track record speaks for itself. So I'm excited about where this conversation is going to go. Let's just dive right in. The same question we open with everybody. Tell me about a time you had a strategy that didn't go as planned.
Yeah, no, that's always a tough question, right? Like nobody likes to talk about the things that
Never.
maybe didn't work. But for me, I think about my time at Radial, where I was CEO, and we were doing e-commerce for a bunch of different brands. And as we were heading into our peak season, maybe my second or third year there, we always struggled with labor, and we were trying to come up with some different ways to address it and create some incentives and some other things that could maybe get employees excited about coming to work and changing the holiday schedule, planning all of these meals, all of these different things. And come the holiday season, from an operational standpoint, we did great, but our goal of improving employee attendance and avoiding some of the call outs and things like that did not work. Did not work at all. And we saw year over year, we didn't really see any improvement in our attendance rates. And so we invested a ton of money into these incentives and did a ton of advertising and other things with the employees and really trying to hype it up. And then at the end of the day, we really got nothing from it.
Wow. I don't think that's a bad strategy.
No.
You need people to do their job. You need engagement. Yeah. All the data shows profitability goes up. All these other things happen when engagement is up. So you had the right problem to solve. What fell flat?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? I actually don't think it was an execution issue either per se, but it was in the sense that when you're in peak season and you're coming around Black Friday and Cyber Monday and all of that. What I learned is that that's a really important time of year for a lot of people. And when you have 30,000 employees across the country that you're trying to get to come to work on the Saturday after Thanksgiving during the Ohio State-Michigan football game and your facilities in Columbus, Ohio, it doesn't matter what you offer them. They're going to stay home with their family and watch the Ohio State football game. And so for me, I think the strategy was actually good. And I do think that the execution was missed in the sense that we underestimated some factors, like the importance of that holiday in specific markets, right? So like if you think about where we saw our biggest issues, it was in like Ohio, where they're playing the Ohio State-Michigan game on that Saturday. The reason I say we failed on execution is because we broad brushed it. Like we broad brushed the strategy and we didn't think about how different markets might be affected differently. Different employees' motivations might be affected differently. And so I think there was, you could say there was flaws in strategy, but I actually think that's more of the execution piece of the strategy of engagement and incentives to get employees to work was good. But then when it came to the details of how you actually execute that strategy, we missed on some of those finer details.
It's amazing. So in the model I use and teach, I talk about if you want engagement, you need clarity and empowerment first, because I can't get people to be engaged if they don't feel clear about what success looks like and they're empowered to do it. One of the most interesting discussions I get is around this idea that that an empowerment isn't just about money. It's about energy too. So I use a Peter phrase: people, time, energy, and resources. From the energy point of view, were you guys even talking about that in any level of detail, or was that more glossed over?
Yeah, I think it was a little bit more glossed over, right? And I
Okay.
think that again, this is why it's so important to also understand, root cause of issues, right? So we knew we had attendance issues years prior, but in terms of root cause, we thought about the holiday, but we just assumed that money would solve for it. And to your point, there was other motivations behind it. The following year we had a much better turnout, and we made some little adjustments. Like one of the little adjustments we made was we advertised that we were going to be streaming the game on every television in the fulfillment
There you
center.
go. My head went there right away. I would have had like, we're having a football party at work,
Yeah,
and you're
exactly.
also going to take care of customers at the same time, so you can go in
Right,
between, right?
right. So we kind of embraced what was going on, and made some adjustments accordingly. We also changed up the schedule so that people could have more time to
Mm.
maybe do things, some flex scheduling, so that they could kind of choose which hours they would want to work versus being forced to work very specific hours. So yeah, I think that it's not always clear exactly what the motivation of employees is and things like that, and you have to dig a little bit deeper. And you can't broad brush it. You have to understand the motivations. You have to your point, you got to think about energy and other things to try to get the team going.
No, that's really important. And there's two things that you're tapping around that I want to go deep on. One, obviously, is motivation. And
Gotcha.
I'll add demotivation, right? So you don't want to demotivate people because they should bring their game to the party. I can't motivate
Absolutely.
you, you motivate you. And the
Absolutely.
second one, though, is this idea of ownership, of agency, of I believe I have what I need to make choices that are best for me. And when you were giving people flex scheduling, you're saying, look, I'm going to help you take care of you, not just take care of us. Those two things are huge. How do you embed that into your business now as a leader? Because
No,
I know you
that's
well
a
enough
great.
to know you've learned from those mistakes.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and I think in terms of execution, the motivation of the team is critical, right? And for me, I think that a big part of leadership is inspiration and motivation, and every employee is motivated differently.
Mm,
So it really comes down to understanding, how your team gets motivated, and if you don't understand the team, you're not going to understand how to motivate them. And then again, the other piece of empowerment and ownership, I love that, right? Like I think, not I think, I've seen over the years that giving people a piece of ownership over what they're doing completely changes their thought process around it. Like when something feels more like I own this and I'm in control and I have some choice in how I do things, the motivation is huge. And so I also think that along with that, you have to make sure the team, all the way down to the front line, understands the mission, right? And
mm,
how what they do is tied to the mission, because that is another motivational factor as well. If I can't really understand how my contribution ties to the broader mission that we're trying to achieve as a team, I'm going to be less motivated. And then
100%
once I
agree.
understand how my role contributes to winning, then I'll do my role that much better, and be that much more committed to it. So I think understanding what motivates your team, understanding that giving empowerment and ownership will help improve motivation, because if I own something, I feel more in control. And control matters to people, whether we want to
Yeah.
admit it or not, it does. And then, like I said, that commitment to a broader mission or purpose, and understanding how what you do contributes to that gives a ton of motivation as well.
That's so good. And that idea that, and that's where when I say clarity, what does success look like? And are we all shooting for the same definition of success? Because if we're not, people are going to make up their own. And
Absolutely.
no empowerment strategy is going to work when people are shooting for a different definition of success, because they'll take whatever you give them and use it for their purposes instead of ours. So how do you teach that to your leaders? Because you've got some folks, you're in a
Yeah.
very senior role, and you've got people, direct reports and indirect reports, who have to be able to not screw this up. What do you do to make sure that they don't screw it up?
Yeah, I mean, I think first and foremost, you practice what you preach,
Mm,
right? And so, I have a lot of conversations with my direct team, around empowerment and ownership and what it looks like. And I demonstrate to them what it looks like. And I'll give you an example. The other day, I had one of my leaders call me and ask me about whether or not they could, fill this position because it would technically put them over budget, but they had some plans around how they could potentially get them under budget. And there was going to be some risk that they wouldn't be over. And what I basically said back to them is, hey, listen, one, it sounds like you have already done enough work that you know the answer here. Two, we own the budget as a team. You really should have this conversation with your peers, and you all should decide whether or not you're comfortable with this decision, and then come back to me for me to bless it. What I was trying to convey to this individual is, one, even though we have a budget and even though we've set a target, how you get there is in your own control, right? Like, to me, I don't need to understand how you made the sausage, right? Like, if you're going to hit the budget, you're going to hit the budget. And as long as you're not doing anything illegal or unethical, then we're good. It's number one. And then number two, that as a team, you all, and we all, I'm a part of the team as well. We own this goal, and it's up to each of us to make sure we're willing to contribute in our own way and that we're covering our own basis. And if you feel like you're introducing risk, rather than coming to me to cover you, how can you work with your team to cover each other? And what that does is that gives a sense of ownership to the team of the goal versus them feeling like I own it.
I love it. Well, so there's no ego in what you're talking about. No, right? I mean, that's a big deal, because a lot of, I'll just say what I've seen and what I've experienced, there can be some massive egos in the room and personality conflicts, even if it's not necessarily ego driven, it's personality chaos between different players trying to make these decisions together. So how do you create that chemistry? Is that something you recruit? Is that something you teach? How do you make sure people maintain that? Because that's a little bit of alchemy. There is science, but there's magic. If you were like most leaders, you learned how to execute strategy through trial and error, and your teammates learned the same way, if they've even learned it at all. The result is that how we execute our strategies generates massive waste and fatigue, but it doesn't have to be this way. If you'd like to master how strategies execute, go to timohai.com/masterclass now. You'll find everything I use to help my clients thrive all in one power-packed place. Don't you think it's time to invest in yourself? All right, back to the interview.
Yeah, no, it's a combination of all those things, right? Like, you get the right people in the room, and you make sure that you don't have people who are overly ego driven. But I think also it's a matter of, again, everybody understands the bigger mission and the bigger goal and how they contribute to it. Let's have some candid conversation and a lot of transparency, and check our egos at the door, right? And I think for me, what I'll tell the team all the time is, one, there is no way I have the right answer on everything.
Right.
So if I'm making the decision all the time, we're gonna fail. So, like, the collective brain trust is definitely more powerful than me individually, right? And I'm not the subject matter expert on every topic, right? And so, my goal is to really provide guidance and support and advice to the team, and then when we get stuck, to be that person who can be decisive with some conviction as a direction we're going. But I shouldn't have to make every decision, and the team should feel empowered to make decisions as a group, and they should feel empowered to make decisions individually. And generally, I try to have a rule that if the group makes a decision that they think is best, I'm not going to override it. That then shows a ton of ego on my part, right? Like, if everybody's saying, hey, we should go this direction, and I'm like, you are all wrong. Now, there's there's been one or two times I've had to do it, but I try to avoid that, right?
Yeah.
And another thing I'll tell you is, the one or two times I have had to do it, it's generally around whether or not a person is the right fit. That's usually where people let emotion come into play, and they get attached to someone that, I'm like, hey, maybe we need to move on, or let this person, and everybody's like, no, let's give them a shot. And I'm like, okay. And then a couple months later, they're like, you were right. And that's just because emotion gets involved.
Loyalty and all that. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So what you're also talking about is perfect for building trust-based accountability as opposed to fear-based accountability. Absolutely. Because you're letting people have more authority to make decisions, but you're also allowing them to own their accountability. They will voluntarily raise your hand and say, this isn't working. Is that right?
Absolutely. No, I am not a fan of fear-based accountability at all, despite the military background where
Right,
they
right.
beat that into you. But I'm not a fan of it. I think what I find is the trust-based accountability is more important. And then when you're doing it really well, there's a fear of breaking that trust or letting your
Mm,
leader down or letting the team
mhm,
down, right?
mm,
And so because fear can be a powerful motivator, but you don't want to be afraid of getting in trouble.
mhm.
What you want is the fear of letting the team down or disappointment. That's a little bit of a healthy fear, right?
Yeah.
So I'm a big believer in that. Again, the sports and military background, that obviously resonates really well with me because as an athlete, that's what you don't want to let your team down. And creating that same atmosphere in business can be difficult, but when you get it, it's a powerful one.
So I want to dip into something because I listened to your interview with our friend Damon on the Learn It
Yes,
All
yeah,
podcast,
Damon's
and
great.
you brought up a concept that I was listening to it and I just lit up. I'm going, this is one of the best explanations I've ever heard. And it was the idea of how do you truly tap into a diverse team? How do you
Yeah,
tap into diversity as a true
absolutely.
competitive
Yeah,
advantage? I loved your explanation. And more specifically, I'll just start with a summary and then I want you just to play with it.
yeah, yeah, of
Is
course.
I heard you shift from being player based and having the best players on your team to being situation based and taking
Yeah,
a really good understanding of the situation, go which player would shine in that situation. So the analogy for me, as an ex former
yeah,
athlete, nothing special. But like, running backs, an open field play requires a different kind of athlete than a
right.
goal line, shove it up the middle of running back. So how
Yeah.
does that factor into how you lead and build your teams?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I'm a big believer in diversity of thought amongst the leadership team, and that again, I'm not the subject matter expert on every category, and different people have different points of view, and so I will intentionally call on someone who maybe doesn't seem like the right person to be leading something, or even just giving their input into a conversation just to get the team to start thinking about they'll wonder, wait, why do you call on the chief people officer about how we should do this? And the reason being is that um, the chief people officer, if we're talking about whether or not we should, I'm trying to think of an example. I mean, some business process that we want to change or whatever.
Sure.
A lot of the team is thinking about, the operators are thinking about all the work it's going to take and the
Yeah,
change
they're more
management piece
task
maybe.
oriented, not
Yeah, more
necessarily
task
people
oriented.
oriented.
The finance team is thinking about, okay, whether or not this is the right decision financially.
Yeah,
Well, the chief people officer is thinking about the impact on the people, right?
yeah.
And so, for me, you want those different perspectives to apply. And then I'm also a big believer of diversity of thought in the sense that, I want to get the technologist point of view on a non-tech issue because I know that the technologist's brain just works a little bit differently. And so they may attack an issue from a different point of view than the HR person or the finance person. So for me, it's a very intentional strategy to try and get different perspectives and different points of view with people with different backgrounds, different experiences on the same topic, or to maybe approach an old topic with a fresh perspective.
I think that's so important. And it's bigger than, I'll even say diversity, because now we're into the I part, the
Yeah,
inclusiveness, right? How do we have you, and the phrase I love is belonging.
absolutely.
How do we create that sense where you belong here, even if you may have your own unique way of looking at the world and even the way you look and everything else, all those
Mm,
different factors
right.
come into play. We want to blend that together as a tapestry because it's when it's woven together, it's so much stronger than it's a bunch of individual strands connected on ends.
And when you don't have it, you miss out on ideas, right? Like
Yeah.
if you don't create an environment where people are comfortable speaking up and contributing on topics that maybe don't seem relevant to them, you might miss a great idea from someone in the room. I think it's really important to make sure everybody feels like their perspective is valued and that even if it's not necessarily their area of business, what they think matters.
It's good, man. It's so good. All right. So, what are two or three things that you think leaders should be especially good at? We've talked about a bunch of stuff. If you want to go back and reinforce any of that, you can. If you have anything else we haven't talked about, what would you throw into the pot?
First and foremost, leaders have to be really good at understanding the areas of strength and weaknesses within their team and within their organization.
Mm,
I think too often leaders don't really understand what their company's even necessarily good or bad at. As you think about strategy, you should know that going in, right? So it's to me, it's a very basic concept because in sports and football, of course you scout yourself, right? And of
yeah,
course you know
yeah, yeah,
that we
yeah,
don't have a great run defense, and so teams are going to try to run the ball on us,
yeah.
right? But in business, sometimes people don't think about that, and so I think that leaders should be really good at having a kind of introspective view of the organization, of themselves, and of their team.
Is that something that you regularly talk with your leaders about? Is that something you've built into your business cadence?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, you think about things like a SWOT analysis, right? Like that's a really formal way to do it, a really technical way to do it. But you can not be doing the SWOT analysis, but still having that kind of SWOT mentality to everything. And for those, it's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. For those who don't understand, but for me, I'm always thinking about, okay, where would a competitor try to take advantage, if we're in a bid, right? Like, what are the things that they're going to maybe try to point out about us? How can we make sure that a potential customer really understands why we're the best option for this, and this is really a core strength of ours, and we can highlight this. So I think that's really, really important. And then the thing that I always say, that's kind of the business side of it. There's two other ones, if I can have two more.
Yeah, go for it.
The other one is you've got to be good with people, right? Like I just don't, for me, there's it's going to be really challenging in any industry to be like an executive or senior leader if you're not good with people. There's very few roles where you're not people facing. Even if you're a CIO, CFO, something like that, you're engaging with people,
And
and the
when you
way
say
that
good with people, break that down for us a little bit.
yeah, no,
Is
yeah.
that just friendly? Is that a good communicator and you can get in front of a room and
Good
command the presence?
communicator. Yeah, good
Yeah.
communicator, likable, right? The good communicator is really, really important.
Mm,
And I think you and I talked about this just
mm,
offline, that something Marvin Ellison taught me is that your whole purpose as a leader is to be able to get your team to execute to a strategy. But if they can't understand the strategy, they're not going to be able to execute to it. So simplicity matters. And
mm.
the way you can communicate and simplify the plan to the team so that everybody can understand it is so important. And I think something that I've been able to do really successfully throughout my career is simplify the plan. Like really make sure that it's really clear to everybody what we're trying to do, what we're doing next, how we're going to get there. I try to eliminate the noise, get rid of things that don't matter. So many leaders care about sounding smart, and they want to have this really cool, complex, and innovative plan. But if I can't understand it, then I'm going to lack motivation because I don't even understand what I'm trying to do. And then two, it's going to be really hard for me to execute because I'm not even 100% sure what it is I'm trying to do. So I think Phil Jackson was the king of simplicity with the triangle offense, which it was a really simple scheme. And that really simple scheme just allowed everybody to go full speed and to execute because they weren't having to overthink, right? And so I
Yeah.
think being able to communicate well to your team and make sure that they understand the plan and that you can keep it simple is really important.
Well, I want to just
Yeah, absolutely.
fine point on that. So what you're talking about being good with people, if I were to summarize it into one sentence, I would say you're really good at creating clarity in an approachable
Yes.
way. And
Yes.
I wanted to use the word likable, but I'm going, sometimes people may not like what you're saying. But if you're approachable, they can still say, I disagree with you. And I go, thank you for that. I'll
Yeah.
factor that in. And maybe I will change, maybe I won't, but I want you to know I heard you and that I respect you. And that's what people are looking for. They're looking for that. What's the word? That sense of being heard,
That
maybe.
transparency, yeah, and then the transparency as well, I think is important. And one thing that you called out that I really like, Tim, is this idea of I usually know when people disagree with me.
Mm,
Because I do
mm.
create that environment where it's okay to do that. And I think a lot of leaders don't, if you're not hearing the disagreement, that's a bad sign because you haven't created an environment where people feel like they can disagree. And
That's so big.
for me, I never take that personal when someone disagrees. And, I'm also not afraid to admit if I was wrong on something and somebody else had a good point. So I think that that environment is important. And again, not to just dwell on it, but again, the sports and military background really help with that, because that's a really common practice in those worlds to kind of do that retrospective. And then the last thing is you have to know the business, right? Like you have to know the business, right?
Yeah.
For me, there's nothing more frustrating than a leader who doesn't even actually understand, whether it be the financials or how we create value. If nobody's going to know every detail, that's not what I'm getting at. But conceptually, do you understand business and how we make money and how we drive value for our customers, and why people would choose to or not choose not to work with us? You'd be surprised how sometimes there's even executives who don't really get the basics on how we make money as a business. They just kind of stay in their little bubble, and that's only effective for so long.
When people say you got to know the business, like, well, there's the math part, and then there's a psychology part. You got to know both.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because I hear you talking. You got to know the math. You got to be able to know what a P&L is. You got to be able to read the sheet and know how do we change the numbers on it. What can we do operationally, et cetera. But also, it is a people business. How do you, and that's what I heard you say on the front too, was like, get the people thing going, the math will follow. But if you lead with math, I don't think people will follow us the same way. Is that a fair summary?
No, you're absolutely right. Like, I think that, your P&L is not a business plan, right? It's a financial model, right? So you've got to have, there's something that makes that P&L work, and you have to understand that piece, right? Like, what is it? Why are people buying this? Why are people spending money with us? Why are we spending money on this or spending money on that? And the why behind it is even more important than the numbers themselves.
So good. Hey, Ilias, I thank you so much for being on the show, and I appreciate you.
Thank you for having me. This was great.
I hope you enjoyed that interview and got some solid takeaways. Here are 3 that I'd like to highlight. 1, your strategy will fail if the dependencies are not accounted for. This is one of the biggest leadership mistakes that I personally see most often. Strategies demand more than budget. We need to proactively secure the people, time, energy, and resources that will be required for the strategy to work. 2, expect your team to create answers. There is no way that you can know everything. More importantly, if you did, your team would eventually disintegrate. Strong leaders know how to facilitate getting great answers and ultimately great decision-making from the entire group. 3, maximize the situation, not the player. It's really easy to give your star players the metaphorical ball. But if you really want to lift your overall performance, define success as a team outcome, not just what the star players produce. Push people out of their comfort zones to see how it impacts the greater team's production and discover what might have been overlooked. In closing, there are 3 things that I would ask of you. First, follow me on LinkedIn and subscribe to my LinkedIn newsletter. You'll get even more content that will both challenge and inspire you every week. Second, please share this podcast with at least one other person right now. And third, hit those rating stars on whatever platform you downloaded this podcast. When you do that, it raises the visibility of what we are talking about to people just like you. Holo mua, onward and upward.